Hey everyone, Irene Lyon here, and welcome to this video, to this channel, and to this entire world of healing trauma, nervous system health, and all things neuroplasticity. Today I have a interview for you with some friends of mine. They were once students and they're now colleagues. They are also naturopathic doctors. Chelsea and Mason of the Health Creation Lab. They are based in Canada, in Ontario. Everything that you'll need to know about them is posted below in the Show More section. But I had them on once before, back in November of 2020. That interview and chat was called, if I believe, Naturopathic Medicine 101. So we get into what naturopathic medicine is and how they see that in relationship to the nervous system and just healing at a holistic level. So I wanted to have them on a second time to talk about a few different things. We talk about terrain theory and germ theory in relationship to human health and disease. We talk about hydrotherapy, which is the use of water and varying temperatures of water to boost circulation, enhance the immune system, detox, and just basically give us a sense of better well-being that is very accessible. And we also start off our chat diving into a more heated comment that was on our first talk around the question, or the statement I should say, that this person made, which is naturopathic doctors are not real doctors. So dive in, have a listen, enjoy the conversation, and we will see you when the next video drops. Hey, you two, welcome back.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. It's been a minute since we've seen each other in person. It feels like a long time.
Yeah, too long.
But what I wanted to do is start off by addressing a comment that was on our last interview chat, where someone said naturopathic doctors aren't real doctors.
Yes.
Let's just start with the juicy one.
Yeah.
And for those of you new here and you haven't met Chelsea and Mason, definitely go back and watch our other interview that was about a year ago, I think now. And in that, you guys talk about, because I asked you, like, your schooling, your training, all the stuff that you do to become NDs, and we won't go into it today. But when you hear someone say, and I'm wondering if you've heard this before, naturopathic doctors aren't real doctors, how do you respond to that? I'd love to hear from both of you on that one.
It's a great question. It makes me smile instantly. Because, firstly, thank you. You're totally right. I am not a medical doctor. Mason is not a medical doctor. So that's clarifying. We identify as naturopathic doctors, and that's different. And so in that identification of differences, totally fair. The word real is fascinating because I think it depends what one means. What is a real doctor and what's not a real doctor. But I think from a philosophical perspective, a naturopathic doctor and medical doctors we're different. We practice differently, and we are there to work in collaboration and also just to be of service in our own ways. And so I think that there's a lot of fear about naturopathic doctors. So we hear that a lot. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that, we're not medical doctors, and that's totally right. We are our own branch of knowledge, and we work with the body, and that's what we do the best. And I think that's pretty real in the sense that we're working with the innate physiology of people all the time. And when doing that, I can't see myself doing it any differently, because it just there's a lot of science behind it. There's a lot of natural science behind it, and it's individualized, which our medicine, I think, has a real big advantage to it, in the sense that we see people that are in front of us and not just a number. So I think that we are real. We're not real medical doctors. We're real naturopathic doctors, or naturopathic physicians, depending on what country or state you're in. And the frame of mindset is that I think some people are just confused maybe on what we do, and I think people have the right to choose who they want as their medical provider. And if you don't think we're a real doctor, then you don't have to come see us. But we have tons of patients, and that really enjoy the care we give. So I'm enjoying that process.
And what came to me is we are real people who are in service to other real people, and we work in real time. We are always working with physiology and moving in the direction of health. And so, yeah, I think that's pretty real.
I agree. I fully agree. Thanks for that kind of viewpoint from both your sides. I really enjoyed listening to that because when I saw that comment, I also kind of laughed. And I also understood because I know people are very confused about all the different options for healing and health. And we've sort of been taught in some ways, trained, maybe even a better word, that medicine is one thing or a healing and health is one thing. And I know from my work and learning about your work, and of course all the other healers and helpers that I've worked with, either personally or colleagues, that there's an entire spectrum of helpers out there. And doctors can be chiropractors, they can be dentists, they can be orthopedic surgeons, they can be GPs, they can be naturopathic doctors, physicians, veterinarians. I'm sure I'm missing a few others in there, but to me, like, what is the root of the word actually, doctor or physician? Do you know the Latin root of it?
To teach.
Docere, I think.
To teach.
Yeah, so to educate, to teach. That's the Latin word, yeah, docere.
Docere, yeah.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So we're teachers. You're teachers.
Totally.
So good.
Yeah.
So I wanted to cover a few topics today. I want to get into hydrotherapy and what that is.
Yeah.
And I also want to cover and pick your brains on terrain theory and what that means. And just for those listening to this, if you're new here, in the last month, well, I'm not sure when this is going to go live, but back in the summer of 2021, I did a video for my channel here all on my health regimen because people really wanted to know what I do. And you may or may not have seen that, but as a quick kind of overview, it was all the things that I do that aren't the nervous system somatic stuff. So exercise, lifting weights, food, cutting out bad oils in my diet, detoxing with sauna, and some of the minerals I've been using, the zeolite, which I know you guys know about, and I did a video on that specifically. And the Feldenkrais work, so movement. So there's so much, right? So talk to me, and I'd love to get both of your feels on this. We'll just go back and forth. Let's start with terrain theory first. And what does that mean, terrain theory? And how do you work with that in the context of your practice and in your own personal life too?
So good. Such a good topic. Terrain theory, we need to talk more about terrain theory, I think. So I'll start personal. My taking care of my terrain is, I don't know, I think it fluctuates between a part-time and a full-time job. It's really important to me that I am in good relation with my terrain and that I am nourishing on various levels. And so my terrain is my entire milieu that defines my physiology, the state of my functionality. It is my this interplay of my systems that create this outcome of the health status that I have. So there's there's the nervous system threads in there. There's the microbiome threads, there's the endocrine threads, there's the mental, emotional, and spiritual threads. There's basically this entire network of systems that come to manifest and express in my constitution. Sometimes we also might use the word constitution, which I think can blend pretty nicely with terrain, and it is absolutely fundamental to the work that we do. Because we treat people, which is in juxtaposition to treating diseases. We treat we are inherently treating terrain or constitution, because everything is customized, everything is individualized. We are that real-time piece. We are working in real time with what is the physiology showing us right now, what therapeutic is indicated given the functionality of the system. So that's what came to mind first.
Yeah, that's a good thought.
Yeah, terrain.
Terrain, yeah. And just more like simply foundational, like terrain theory is basically the idea that as a system or health or whatever you want to view it as, we have the ability to kind of bolster our system, whether that's our health, our immune system, our just general energy levels, whatever. The contrary view is sort of the germ theory, which is this idea that germs cause disease, and that's kind of where it lies. Terrain theory sort of disagrees in the sense that, well, the germ actually has to have the right environment to be able to grow. And you could view germ as anything. It could be bacteria, it could be virus, it could be whatever. So terrain theory is the ability to sort of bolster your environment. And like you were talking about, Irene, like mostly the foundational things are what's going to get people the furthest, like a good diet, lots of sunlight, lots of healthy relationships, movement. So yeah, just basically terrain theory is the ability to help your body have a strong or a very, yeah, it's a very
Resilient,
resilient is a good word. Yeah, resilient environment that allows you to be healthy and that things can affect you, whether that's a germ or a disease or a process that happens in the body.
Thank you.
My
An interesting thing happened actually a couple nights ago. My husband, Seth, you know Seth, and I were out for a dinner in our local hood, and he got, those here in Canada they're called Caesars, but I think in the States they're called Bloody Marys. It's tomato juice, or here it's Clamato and a little vodka, and it usually comes with like celery or a bean or. Well,
Yeah.
at this place, they put in a skewer of a prawn.
Oh.
And we've been to this place before, and no, we've never had any trouble with their food, but he ate the prawn, just, gonna eat the prawn. And within a few seconds, he felt this wave of heat through his body. The kind of wave you would get if you felt like you were gonna maybe have diarrhea. You kind of get that hot, like purge feeling. And I was sitting next to him and he went into a full sweat. It was so fast. And I'm like, "Are you going to be okay?" He's like, "I'm going to be okay. Like, do you need to go purge and throw up?" He's like, no, that'll just make it worse." And so he just sat there and worked with it. And he has a very robust immune system. I would actually say both of us do. Over the past year, we've been doing a lot of stuff. And it passed.
Huh?
And, was it coincidental? Did he just decide to like get a little sweat in that moment? But it literally happened right after he ate the prawn. Obviously, it's cold, so it's not cooked. So there's more likelihood of there being bacteria, so hence a germ.
Yeah.
But his system just handled it. And he's never felt that. And I mean, I've had food poisoning in the past. I'm going to assume you and most people listening to this have. You know when something wrong went into your system. And it was just really interesting to watch his terrain handle that thing.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, well, that little shrimp had no
chance.
no chance.
No chance
Yeah.
in that system. Oh wow, and that's fascinating. That like really quick elevation in temperature. That's really fascinating because
Yeah.
that's such an adaptive strategy for our well, if it was immunological, that pathogen invasion, then that elevation in temperature is so important for the immune system.
So from a medical point of view, like, I don't want to assume, but let's just assume no one knows this cascade of reactions. What's going on? What happened in Seth's system? Let's just say that, yeah, that shrimp had some bad bacteria on, because some bacteria is very good.
Yeah.
right? Like sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, all that. But this was clearly a pathogen that was, I mean, maybe it was E. coli or something like that.
Right.
What's going on in a human system when their terrain was like Seth's? Let's just give an example. And then I'd love the example of someone's terrain that isn't healthy and
Yeah.
what might happen. Is that a fair question to break that down?
Yeah, I
Yep.
think that's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So
You want to begin? So say,
Sure.
hypothetically, we eat something gnarly. So we ate a contaminated shrimp, and what's next? So it went into the mouth.
yeah,
We've
so
chewed it.
it's into our mouths. So then it goes into our system. Our body's probably sensing it right when it gets in our mouth.
Even the scent
Yeah,
is
even the scent.
interesting. The
Yeah.
scent could have triggered something.
Yeah. And then what would happen is that it would go into your stomach. Some stomach acid may help kill some of the whatever.
Yeah, stomach acid.
And then it would kind of make its way through, maybe working its way to like the stomach wall, maybe, or if it gets into the small intestine. But that's usually a little bit after. I don't know if it would happen that quick. But essentially,
That's true.
the first sort of line of defense is your innate immune system. And
Yeah.
that's like the non-specific first line of defense of your immune system. And that is non-specific, meaning it's just going to try to get rid of or adapt in a way that helps you the best. And in that case, it sounds like the temperature may have helped your partner, and the innate immune system could have kicked in some sort of immune processes like macrophages. They're one of the big ones that just kind of eat things no matter what they are. They just go out and they
Gobble.
sense and they gobble things.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it'll alert the immune system after the fact, and that's why you get that temperature or that fever, is because it's those immune system cells, those and some of the interleukins, whatever, they would alert your system to be like, hey, there's something in here and we got to kill it. And
Yeah.
heat kills things very well.
Yeah, that set point in your I think it's hypothalamus. It's a brain structure will change your set point
Yep.
in the whole system, which would create a cascade of interleukins, like you said.
IL-6.
And then what are these other
Cytokines.
cytokines, which are basically these messengers that just flood the system, and physiology, bang, it goes. So it sounded like Seth's physiology. It just like, whew, made that shift, which that's really fascinating to me, how quickly that system came online, if that's what was occurring, which is quite fascinating, how quick that reaction could have been, because normally, let's say if we were to transition to maybe a system that was less regulated,
Yep.
Maybe it took quite a long time for that set point to alter. And so maybe that's what happens when you eat something, and then 6 to 12 hours later you get up in the middle of the night and you're like, oh gosh, this is going to be a bad one. And so you're puking, you're pooping your pants, you're maybe then you have a fever, you're sweaty, you're pale, you're clammy. Maybe now I'm just kind of like hypothesizing. I don't even know what the data would suggest on this, but like maybe it took that long for that set point to change. I don't know.
Yeah.
Could be.
Yeah, and obviously like the quantity and the amount of, like, maybe if you had a whole shrimp dinner, maybe it would be different and it was just a
Yes.
Caesar. But it reminds me of a kid. Kids get really big fevers and they react really strongly. They're always puking, they're always coughing.
Yeah.
And
Snotty.
generally it's because their immune system's in pretty good shape.
Yeah, their innate immune system is so effective because
Yeah.
it's educating itself, and that's the most important part of being little and getting all of these things in the system. Is there's this massive education process about, okay, here's my innate immunity, and then translating that into memory, or the adaptive immunity. So did we cover all the so the stomach acid I feel like is really important. Even enzymes in the mouth is part of that healthy terrain. The
Yep.
saliva, the microbiome in the mouth and the stomach, digestive enzymes in the intestine, the integrity of the mucosa. Oh my gosh, that is so important for a healthy, robust terrain. Is a nice thick mucus layer on that stomach. That glycocalyx needs to be really nice and thick to protect that stomach. So say it's not there, maybe you have ulcers. So maybe someone with maladaptive terrain, they eat something that is contaminated, and then but they have like gouges in their stomach because their microbiome, their glycocalyx, and their entire mucosa of their stomach is so compromised. Maybe that little thing on the shrimp just has an open door right into the bloodstream because it's, you know, like an ulcer is a wound.
Yeah, and this is something that even real medical doctors are talking about now. And there's I think there's like 8,000 studies on it, and it's called metabolic endotoxemia. And, you know, the alternative people call it leaky gut, or, you know, your gut permeability is off. But this is a known concept that is in a lot of studied PubMed databases, and even, you know, Western medicine, or people with more conventional mindsets, for better or for worse, are, you know, they realize that this is a thing. So it's cool to know that, yeah, for sure, those little gouges, which are more like micro gouges, but they definitely play an effect in our ability to respond to things like a bacteria or a virus or a bad shrimp.
It could be likened to, say you have a wound on your, you know, your skin. How susceptible is that open wound to infection, secondary infection? We talk about things like eczema being really tricky because it's basically open wounds. Kiddos are scratching with, you know, kind of funky nails all the time, and then not only do we have eczema, but we have this secondary infection on top of the eczema, which needs to be treated. So we can think about boundaries, membranes, barriers. The integrity of those barriers is so important for our terrain, whether that's our skin, our mucosa in our gut, our respiratory tract. Yeah, that's huge.
It's all so interesting, and I would agree with you, Mason, about what you mentioned, the metabolic endotoxemia, and you said 8,000, like tons of research papers. And it feels hopeful that is starting to make that mainstream. I mean, it's so clear to me that someone who has a healthy terrain, who takes care, and it isn't necessarily about the perfect diet, but knowing what foods for you, for example, if we think of diet, are working and aren't working. And then there's the things that we just know aren't good for us, like the bad vegetable oils, toxic oils, obviously chemicals, preservatives, additives, trans fats. I mean, the list is long, and more people, I think, are starting to understand, at least those who are looking for the information, what is good and what is not good when it comes to that, and then how they choose their diet based on their preferences, their constitution. There's that word. It's just so individual. It's so individual, and it changes in that individual based on the year, as I know you guys are big into elements in Chinese medicine and the seasons. The terrain theory piece, would you say that is still kind of making its way up, even though people are talking about the microbiome and the importance of these things? Is it still kind of an odd one? Is it fairly accepted in the naturopathic worlds, or is there still debate in your field?
I don't know if I hear the word terrain theory a lot. Do you?
You hear it thrown around a bit. I think indirectly, I think people are talking about it. Maybe they're not saying it, but, you know, and maybe they don't even know they're working on it, even though they are. But I've heard it's around, but I don't think it's that common.
Yeah, like it's maybe infused in the practice, but maybe that languaging that's that specific, and certainly that delineation between terrain and germ theory. I don't hear a ton of dialogue about that in our community, but I would say that most naturopathic doctors are respect the terrain and work with the constitution.
And then if we look at, like, how would you define the germ theory? I know that this has been quite popular the last little while, and it kind of, and again, my history might be off here, but that was sort of the Pasteur, Louis Pasteur, and connect those dots for me, for those watching. What does that mean? What does germ theory mean? Does it work in some cases and not in others? I know that kind of thing. How would you define it? Riff on that for a little bit.
Hmm.
You want to start that one?
You want me to?
Sure.
Okay.
I can too.
Germs. Okay, so germs from
What
this.
is a germ,
Well,
Chelsea?
germs from this way of knowing would be a pathogen, so something that is not going to create a symbiotic, healthful relationship with its host. It's more like a parasitic relationship where or some other form of relationship that is not not creating health. So it relates to disease. So there's the invasion of a pathogen, like Mason had said before, bacteria, virus, fungi. Even in traditional Chinese medicine, they language things as external pathogen invasion, and these can be hot, cold, wind, damp. So there's maybe even a wider interplay here. So there's this germ that comes into the body, and then it would create infection, which then has a label that has some sort of a disease. So lots of different types of infections, depends on the tissue that it would be located in, depends on the changes that happen in that tissue. So we can get like histological with it and look at the different cellular changes, and then we can give it a label. We can go clinical and be like, okay, here's the symptom profile, so that's what that disease looks like. But it's basically pathogen equals disease, which usually leads to treatment equals eradicating pathogen.
Right, that's the link that's important,
Right.
I think, is that if you,
think.
yeah, like if you get rid of the disease, then you get rid of the problem. So if you get rid of the bug, you get rid of the problem.
Yeah, the bug's the problem. It's not that that went where it landed and how it proliferated. It's more about the actual little being or non-being.
Yeah.
Which are, I think, do exist.
Yeah,
How about a
there.
parasite? Like, would that be considered a germ, or is that like a totally different concept?
I think
'Cause
that
it's a-
still fits.
I think it fits in there.
Yeah, because there was wasn't somebody drinking H. pylori? That's the person who was researching stomach ulcers like so long ago, and they were like trying to give themselves an ulcer.
I heard about this.
Oh, yes.
I guess that's not a parasite, but it kind of looks like one because it's corkscrew. So maybe my mind went somewhere else.
But parasites are similar. When I think germ, I honestly think more bacteria, but yeah, they're everything. Parasite is just something that, it gets the host and takes away and hides itself and doesn't really give much back. But yeah, parasites.
And I think they're a problem. Like, for example, most of us have this incredible diversity in our digestive tract. Bacteria, fungi, viruses, probably a parasite or two.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you even have maybe you have a helminth in there. You might not even know about it. Like, I thought, for example, what I thought was super fun is I can't remember who they were, but maybe I could send you the link, Irene, for the paper. It was a group of researchers who were looking at the microbiome diversity of a previously uncontacted indigenous community in the Amazon. And they had commensal or symbiotic parasites and helminths in the gut. So, and if you were to have taken that helminth and put it, so that's a worm.
What's a helminth? Sorry, I don't.
Yeah, it's a worm.
A worm.
Oh, a worm. Okay, I know worms. All right.
If you were to take that little worm out of that gut of that indigenous person from the Amazon, and you were to put that in Mason's gut even, which is a pretty robust gut, I think, he might be very unwell.
Yeah.
So it's that interesting kind of shift between germ to terrain is like, what is pathogenic and what is not?
Mm-hmm.
So germ theory is definitely resting on this strong assumption of pathogenesis.
Yeah, this causes this, and you treat this to get rid of that.
That's a great example, Chelsea, of the worm, because like lots of dogs and cats have worms and they're fine. and you do deworm, and being the daughter of a vet, that was like a huge part of veterinary medicine, was all the worms that animals would have. But that example of the indigenous or the Amazonian tribesmen people, and them just being immersed in that ecosystem on the land, being connected with all the microbes and everything, their systems, in my opinion, my assumption is are probably much stronger than ours, even though they're not doing all the healing self-care techniques. It's just part of their makeup.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right?
And their culture.
Yeah.
And fascinating. I think it was the same group of researchers also found that in that previously uncontacted indigenous community in the Amazon, they actually carried bacteria that had resistance to antibiotics.
Wow.
Whoa.
Can you explain what that means for people that don't understand that?
Basically, there's two ways that things, whether that's bacteria, you were talking about the antibiotic resistance, right?
Antibiotic, yeah.
Yeah, so there's drift and then there's shift, and it's like these bacteria and viruses, they can change and share information at like a very fast level. So even these people who haven't been exposed to antibiotics still have these things in them, right?
Yeah, they had
That
exactly.
were resistant to the antibiotics.
Yes.
Which is just really signifying like a really, I don't know if I'm getting it right, but a really
Yeah.
robust kind of
Communication tool.
Communication
so that
of-
like when bacteria engage with a therapeutic that is designed to kill them, called antibiotics, they learn about that and they tell their neighbors, they tell their
Right.
friends. And like Mason was saying, there's drift and shift, and there's mechanisms of which this communication occurs. And they do it at rates that is almost beyond comprehension. So basically, someone, got an antibiotic in, for example, North America, and somehow that data was transferred all the way to all of these bacterial colonies, somehow all the way into a community that literally has never been contacted by a white person, anyone other than their indigenous community. Somehow those bacteria have communicated in such a way to that being and said, hey, by the way, there's an antibiotic out there, and here's a pro tip. Run this pathway instead of this one, because that's going to kill you.
Yeah.
Crazy.
We know so little, don't we?
It's just, wow.
Okay. I think we got it. Basically, terrain theory. I hate the word theory sometimes because I agree. I think that these things flux depending on the person, the thing. And then there's things that aren't natural, that are chemicals, that even the best person with the biggest, strongest terrain, if you dip, this is a terrible example, these things come into my head, but if you dip somebody in nuclear waste, you're probably going to have a problem, even if you're really, really healthy, or if you're living by power lines or by a toxic chemical plant.
Yeah.
You see where I'm going there? Like the system is
Yeah,
only
sure.
so strong depending on the man-made thing that's there impacting us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think there's limits to it for sure.
There's
and
limits.
there's weaknesses. Some people have digestion is their weak part. Often I find in clinic that some people have just like a weak system. Some people have really bad skin, but their
Yeah.
digestion is rock solid. Some people have really poor digestion, but they have other problems. They have like asthma
Endocrine
or
or-
like they just have a weakness. I don't want to call it a genetic weakness, but they have like a systematic weakness. And I think that can show up in the terrain too
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah.
And just to bring this back to a little bit of nervous system stuff, I don't have the story right in front of me, but we had a student from Smart Body, Smart Mind send us a unsolicited letter of what occurred to her since doing the program this year. And I'm allowed to share this, of course, anonymously, and I'm not going to share all of it because I can't remember, but the gist of it was she was born and she believes that her mother had the herpes virus quite strong in her system. And when she was little, her mother called them, I forget what it was, but hot spots, or just, she called them burning spots. I'm getting it wrong, but something that wasn't medically based, but it was her mother's way of describing the pain she was having within her body. And then the student, as an adult, ended up getting these things as well, did some research. Nobody really knew what it was. And finally she realized, oh my goodness, this is the herpes virus. And kind of went down this path of healing, but realized how much trauma was in her system, how much dysregulation was in her system. Actually, I don't know if it's a he or she, doesn't matter. But their system was taxed, started working at healing the terrain of the nervous system with, of course, the practices that you two know of. And slowly they healed these I'm not sure if it was sores or if it was just a malaise of the immune system, to the point where they can eat the foods that used to trigger these reactions. So there was something to do with the kind of food that was triggering these reactions. I think it was, I can't remember what it was, but slowly they were able to bring back these foods that would trigger, maybe it was a histamine response in the body, I can't quite remember. And now they can eat anything they want and no reaction, no expression of this. I know herpes, is a virus, but it's not coming out of the system. And I think about things like chickenpox and shingles, right? And how when someone is really stressed, if they've had the chickenpox when they were young, they might get shingles in God knows where within the body, because it can go in all sorts of spots.
Yeah.
But I wanted to just mention that because there's so many avenues that we can heal, whether it is the diet, whether it is the environment, whether it is the relationships, whether it's the nervous system. And they're all kind of contributing just a little bit or maybe a lot, depending on the person, to improving that terrain so that these existing, and I say this with air quotes, germs, whatever it is, aren't able to have the party in your system versus a system that has poor terrain.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, the HSV or the herpes viruses are a perfect example of that.
Absolutely.
Because they do come out when people are stressed, or they get too much sun, or they eat those like high foods in the certain amino acids or whatever. Yeah, it's a perfect example of the bug and the germ, and also the terrain that can hold it off, or as you do the nervous system work, the physiological work, it can really highlight the terrain theory really good.
So
The foundational training.
The foundation. So if you were to, because we could speak for hours about all the things that people could do to improve their terrain, and I found myself almost saying immune system, but it's more than that, right? It's the entire system, and also how that system relates to the environment. The one thing I wanted to cover with you two today is hydrotherapy.
Yeah.
Because for me, and I was thinking last night, knowing I was going to talk to you today, when did I first experience hydrotherapy? And it was in Turkey in 1997 when I was with my first boyfriend, and we went to a classic Turkish bath.
Oh, hammam.
And not like the popularized ones here that are just all fun and frou-frou, but like it was intense. Like the women were in one area, the men were in one area, big marble room, everything was marble, huge steam, hot, cold. There was this old woman wearing like underwear that was hardly on her body, with her breasts fully bare. You're there and they're naked except for your panties. And this was the first time I had ever seen anything. I was in my early 20s. I was like, whoa, this is different. And I just went with it. She didn't speak any English, but she just mimed where I had to go. Like, go here and scrub, and then go here and then lay down, and then they massage you.
Oh, wow.
And then they like splash water on you, and then you do these other things. And I remember getting out of that feeling like I was a baby, like a fresh baby that had just been scrubbed and cleansed. And it was just lovely. And I don't know if it really occurred to me if that was like something that set me off in wanting to be in water more or use that kind of therapy. But the one thing I love about hydrotherapy, and I want you guys to riff on it in a moment, is it's really accessible, granted you have water. Even a shower works really well. Um, Hot, cold, of course. But tell me about hydrotherapy and what it's good for and how it helps the body from all the different perspectives. And then I'll add in some things too as you guys talk. But I want to just start off this hydrotherapy talk now.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, there's many different ways to use water, and like you said, a lot of them are really accessible. So, the spas are nice, but they're not always accessible. But you can do these mini kind of treatments in your house. So even like a steam inhalation with steaming water with a towel over your head, that is hydrotherapy. Cold and hot shower, that is hydrotherapy. There's different techniques, popularized in different countries, cultures that amplify the effects of water there's so many to talk about, but a lot of the European ones are kind of what we know and practice. But every culture has something to do with water, heat, changing the dynamics of either air or water with temperature to have an effect on the body. And basically what cold does, because there's two kind of temperatures we can work with, is cold and hot. And cold really sort of, the old school naturopathic doctors used to call it hardening. So what it does is it hardens your tissues. And from a physiological perspective is that it very strongly vasoconstricts all the micro vessels, lymphatic, blood vessels, everything in your body, and it kind of creates that shrinking, that constriction. Heat is all about the opposite, so it's all about dilation, expanding. So even if you're just doing that and that, you create this sort of rinse cycle where you're dilating, constricting, dilating, constriction. Just like what the heart does around the body, you're doing that for the peripheral circulation in your body, which is like football fields worth of little vessels, either lymph or veins or little arteries that transport wastes or transport nutrients. So to get that whole pathway working, I think is why people end up feeling like a baby, like you did in Turkey.
Yeah, you're just a noodle by the end of it.
Because your skin has nervous system receptors for the sympathetic and the parasympathetic right on the skin. So doing the hot and cold is a way to modulate those two processes. And obviously there's a lot of other physiological things that go on, but that's the basics of like what cold and hot do.
Yeah, and which is so, like when you were first asking the question, Irene, what could people do for their terrain? Honestly, the first thing before I could, your mouth was kind of saying it, I was like, done, hydrotherapy.
Yeah.
It is, like May said, and you said as well, Irene, it's accessible and it is so effective because you're leveraging your own physiology. You're working with your physiology. Like Mason was describing, that expansion and constriction of vessel diameter has profound implications on your ability to detoxify, on your the tonality of your nervous system. It alters your immune system, your endocrine system. There's these rumors, and I don't even know if it's true, but I think it is true. In our profession, these in the time of sanatoriums, which were healing centers, and they were just using absolutely simple therapeutic modalities like hydrotherapy. They called it dietetics at the time, which is just food, and sunlight. And in some cases, that's literally all they used in these sanatoriums or places of healing. And people would go to these sanatoriums in times as kind of dire as the plague. They would go to these sanatoriums to receive these cures, and people were getting better. And so they, at some point, some of these sanatoriums were actually raided by, I don't know, some sort of authority group that would be like, what are you doing in here? you must be up to no good. You must be practicing medicine with a license. There must be something going on here. And they just came in. This is the rumor, or the stories we hear. Story tells that they just came in and there's just a bunch of wet towels on the floor. You know, and it's just like, I don't know, this is what we do here. We just got some towels. You want a treatment? There's no drugs here. That's, we kind of like ghost on that lineage in our practice because, you know, you keep it really simple and you have profound implications on people's functionality because nervous system tonality, ability to detoxify, modulating the immune system. Whoa, those are major foundations of health.
Yeah, and really good. The one treatment that we do is also really good for digestion because of the blood flow and the lymph flow to the area.
Yeah.
And
it's so good. Like I feel joyful even thinking about hydrotherapy.
Yeah, we do a lot of it.
We do so much hydrotherapy in clinic.
Yeah, you know, there's things called like the warming sock treatment, which are very simple.
Yes.
And it's just, you've probably heard about it from your grandma or someone else. If not, it's just, you know, in the example of like a cold, you get all congested in your sinuses and we view that as just like, you know, you have some mucus, you have something going on with your immune system, obviously, but putting cold cotton socks on your feet and then just wrapping them in wool socks and then kind of wrapping them up and getting into bed is such an easy way to kind of pull all the blood down from your stagnant or congested area into your feet. So it's all about physics, it's all about dynamics really in some of it, and it's pretty cool. And that's just one example of 100.
Yeah.
That's so interesting, and I want to read something in a second, but just to review what you've said, see if I got it right. So this idea of hydrotherapy is really using hot, cold water. It could be the liquid, it could be the vapor, it could even be ice, you know, cooling packs, which I know, also, or hot water bottles. I love those at certain times of the month. They help the female areas, you know, soothe, or even the kidneys. If you're really stressed, putting a hot water bottle behind your back and just feeling it even on the ground is a lovely way to drop those adrenals and kidneys and warm them up. But the circulatory effect is really important because it's basically, it's like exercise. It's like what Ely and I teach in our up and down. It's this opening and closing, opening and closing. And that is helping to flush and move the central chain and all the stuff, all the lymph, the blood. It's bringing in nutrients. It's taking the bad stuff out.
Yeah.
So it's creating this flow, which we need, and stagnation creates illness. Like a poor terrain would be stagnant, be like a swamp, right?
Yeah.
Where there's no oxygen going through. So we're wanting to improve the circulation. And I often have said to some of my students who are very sick, you know, who can't exercise, who are just not able to get out and get that sweat going, jump into the shower and do some hot and cold, not to the point of it being so extreme that you can hardly bear it, but it could be lukewarm with cooler. It doesn't have to be these insane contrasts that are so popular right now, but it's about titration, right? Like your system will learn as you incrementally add the stimulus a little bit more, but you start with maybe it's just your feet going in a cool bath of like a bucket of water to a warm bucket of water. And that is enough to stimulate that circulation. And then the piece with the immune system, I think, is interesting because it's also providing a little bit of a stimulation to the system. It's like it's waking it up. It's like knocking on the door saying, are you there? Are you there? And giving it a bit of a spark.
Yeah.
So it was circulation, immune, and there was another one.
Oh, detoxification.
Detox.
To me, like as you were saying, those nutrients coming in, those waste products coming out, that like basically physiological rinse is phenomenal.
Yeah, great for the lymphatics.
Yeah.
And the fourth one was that nervous system tone of like just how relaxed you can feel after a hydrotherapy treatment versus, you know, it's comparable to a good nervous system session, a massage. It's incredible what it can do to relax people. And in a system, in a world where sympathetic dominance usually is happening, it can help tone that down a bit in an appropriate manner.
And I loved, Chelsea, what you said about the sanatoriums. I'm assuming those are mainly in Europe, because when I have been to Europe and I've gone to certain places, it's not spa isn't the right word. These soaking tubs, these areas of there's the hammam, but I was just in Austria a couple of years ago, and it wasn't there to like get beautified, but it was beautification, and it was just being in water, being in steam, being in dry heat, cold, and just circulating through that. It's very hard to find these things here in North America, I found.
Yeah.
But I want to read something. I'm going to link this book. I may have mentioned this one to you guys before. It's a Casey book, Health Through Drugless Therapy. And I love Edgar Casey and all of his stuff. And he was a big hydrotherapy person. And I want to mention some of the things that I came across in this. But there's a little snippet here on water therapy in ancient history. So I'm going to read it because it's kind of fun. So story time. So the author of this book, this is not Casey writing, but one person who studied his work immensely. The use of water as therapy for healing has existed for thousands of years. Baths and remedies are mentioned in Sanskrit as early as 4000 BC. The White Lama told me that he found a description of water therapy in the old Tibetan writings. The Babylonians, Egyptians, Cretans, and the Persians all used baths and water therapy extensively, long before the Romans inscribed their history on the architecture of their luxurious baths, which they left all over Europe, Africa. In Crete, Greek island, one may see the restoration of an ancient ruins of Knossos in indoor bathrooms and the equivalent of modern plumbing systems with intricate drains for bringing in fresh water and flushing out the used water. The Spartans of Greece immersed newborn babies in ice-cold water to immunize them against disease and to toughen them. So that hardening that you mentioned, Mason, with the cold water, I think that I read that last night and was like, oh, that's so interesting how old that medicine is, and how we're just seemingly getting back to it right now. What's your thoughts on the kind of popularization of ice baths? Have you gotten a lot of your clients asking about that?
Yeah, it's becoming more and more common, like the Wim Hof, the just straight up ice baths, and it's trending in that more like biohacking world, which I think is cool. I think it can help. I think some people may be pushing it a bit too far, for their vitality. So that's that titration piece that I think is often missing when these trends come out and people are super stoked. But yeah, like getting into something really cold every once in a while, if you're adapted to it, is definitely good. If you're not ready for it, it can also be a negative stressor. It can be a positive stressor for some people, and I think that there is some really interesting science that shows that it can really help metabolic health. It can really help brown adipose tissue be created, which is a really unique type of fat in your body that can actually kind of like burn calories. That's different than white fat or regular adipose tissue. So the science behind it is great, and I think especially from more of like that seasonal perspective, I think we're supposed to get cold in the winter if you're in an environment where it is cold.
Yeah.
So I think that might be like stimulating some sort of process for people that are in those environments where they can kind of cue those physiological kind of hormesis stressors that are good stressors in a way. But the right place at the right time, I would say, for the right person. What do you think of the old ice baths?
The old ice baths. Yeah, I mean, we've taken a couple of dips here and there, and they're almost exhilarating at times, like going for a short jog and then a nice brisk dip. It's absolutely rejuvenating, and I would echo Mason's just, I guess, caveat that, like, for example, a very depleted person, so maybe their terrain is, it's dysfunctional, they've got a lot of signs in the system of deficiency, so, there's this pale, poor, low energy, throughout the entire, all the physiology, that person is probably not a good candidate for really cold water. Maybe they just actually need to start with neutral water, room temp, because even there is therapeutic qualities to a tepid bath. You don't need to get chilled. Actually, getting chilled during hydrotherapy is a contraindication to the treatment. So if you are feeling chilled after a hydrotherapy session, even if it's a cold dip, you went into it warm and you came out and you're actually starting to shiver, you've pushed the boundary. It's way too far. You should feel, there should honestly be, there should be euphoria, there should be heat, your skin should go a beautiful perfused pink if you have less melanin, so you can see that. There should be this really like this open energy of like goodness. If you come out of it and you're like your teeth are chattering and it's not the right answer.
Yeah, and part of that has to do, I think, with the nervous system and the ability to control your breath and how the two branches fit in there and the segments of even those branches. So
yeah, it's nuanced.
There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, it's nuanced.
So I think it's great, but
yeah, water's so good.
Yeah.
No, I'm glad I brought that into question, because it has become this biohack thing, and from a nervous system perspective, you're absolutely right. If the system is strong and can be with that stimulation and not go into a shutdown or a hyperarousal, it's perfect. And I have seen, you see the videos and stuff, and someone's getting in and it looks like they're going into terror because it's so cold. And I say, that's not good, because you're not working with that element. You're actually trying to resist something, but you're in it. And then you get out and there's a sympathetic adrenalized state that is not working towards that expansion and that circulation. It's actually leading you to potentially collapse. Right? And I think that it can be a great indicator of where a person is at. And like you said, Chelsea, start with a tepid bath, or a tepid, like a little sprinkle of cold water after you're hot, just to feel that difference. One of and again, I'll reference this book because there's like 10 pages on hydrotherapy in this book, but one of them that he really popularized or talked about was, he calls it a cold sitz bath. I don't know if you've ever come across sitz. Spelt, it's kind of funny, but it's SITZ, so you're sitting.
Oh yeah, love them.
And I've been using those quite regularly to basically put more stimulation into those internal organs, the reproductive system, the gut, with much success. And because what's occurring, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it's basically flushing all the blood to the core.
Yes.
And then when you get out and it warms up, it brings it. So again, that detox, that circulation is going to those really important central organs. So it doesn't have to be, the reason I mentioned it, a full immersion.
Yeah.
You can just sit, kind of like waste, and get those key organs in there and have a therapeutic effect.
Love it.
Yeah, that's so good.
I love sitz baths.
Sitz baths are good. They're one of the ones that, we do recommend more than others, for sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
We have a colleague, her name's Dr. Susanna Serenko, and her life work has been translating all these old hydrotherapy books into a present readable kind of text.
Cool.
And her favorite thing to do is like a sitz bath. It's called a natural bath.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she does it every morning, and it's not a sitz bath, but it's very similar. And she is a very, very knowledgeable person in the hydrotherapy world from a very traditional, historical context. And she loves sitz baths. She loves these natural baths. So that's really cool to hear that you're doing the sitz baths.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks to Edgar Casey. I mean, it was just reading his text. I'm like, what does that mean? And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And he even says in it, don't work up to 3 minutes, but in his funny way of speaking, because he was, late 1800s to 1945. But do not be, I don't even know what the words would be, but do not be silly, but not that word, and push yourself. Perhaps you only stay 30 seconds. That is sufficient. And so even back then, he was bringing in this idea of titration.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we have to be discerning as consumers of this work. You still have to listen to your system. And just because, Wim Hof is in an ice bath for 2 days, I'm being exaggerating, but, for like hours, my goodness, that could kill some people.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about Epsom salts. Let's go to the warm bath. What is an Epsom salts bath doing? Because I know that is something that people say, oh, just have a hot Epsom salts bath. But what is that actually providing the physiology? Because they do feel really good.
Yum. Magnesium for the win.
It's magnesium.
Epsom salt, or a magnesium compound. So you can have a synthetic Epsom salt, and that might be a magnesium sulfate, or is it phosphate? Sulfate. And that's more of like an industrial byproduct. Or you could have a Epsom salt mined from ancient ocean seams, and that's magnesium chloride. And either way, your skin soaks up that magnesium real quick, which has a vasodilation effect on the vessels. Right?
The heat or the magnesium?
Magnesium creates a vasodilation.
Yeah, it dilates. It lowers your blood pressure.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
And then you'd have a hot bath, which is sedating to the nervous system.
Yep. And magnesium is very calming. It's one of the more inhibitory minerals for the nervous system, so it's very sedating. It's involved in like many processes in the body. So and sometimes people's guts again aren't that great. So like the skin absorbs so much, especially with the heat. It just kind of drives it in there further.
Yeah.
Pores open up. So magnesium is really good for relaxing, for better words. But it's an enzyme for many different really important functions in your body. Mm-hmm. And then I think the sulfur, like you said, it's more of like the whatever you said, but sulfur is also really important.
Sulfate,
so I think, and a lot of these ancient springs and hot springs, they have all these different minerals in. They stink so bad. But I think these ancient minerals in some of these, if it is a dried salt or a live hot spring, there's lots of micro minerals that I think we can get from magnesium salts or hot springs, or just probably in the lakes too. Like these are ancient glaciers or they're ancient riverbeds or whatever. So there's got to be different things we're absorbing in there. For sure. I don't know if that's studied, but I'm going with it.
Yeah, why not?
It feels good. And no, thank you. And another, again, for people that don't have a bathtub, because some people don't, you can still do this with like a bucket of hot water with your feet. Right? And I personally, if I'm not wanting to get into a bath at night, but I'm feeling a little cool or a little cold, or a little relax, I'll get like actually a big stock pot that we have that's huge, and I'll fill it up with hottish warm water and put just a whole bunch, like 5 cups of salts, and do that as more kind of a version that isn't as intense as filling up a whole bathtub, because I know some people can't do that. And I also know that if you live somewhere where there's water restrictions, like in Australia, and I mean here in Vancouver, it's plenty of water, but there's some places where you can't always fill up tubs and have long showers that are 30 minutes long.
Yeah.
Just consciously, you probably don't want to do that, but you can do a lot with a bucket, a couple of buckets, hot water bottles, cool compresses, steam.
Yeah.
Steam can go a long way. You don't need a lot to steam yourself. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts on hydrotherapy other than just it's wonderful and we should use it as a way to improve our terrain? Anything else, you guys?
Oh, I'll add something that is a little, maybe, I don't know, possibly less scientific, but I'm sure at some point we'll have the science to back this up, is I think that I acknowledge water as an entity, a living entity, and it is. There's something also just very therapeutic about communing with water, and so that's another healing element to hydrotherapy, which maybe is, the future will tell us in a more kind of Western science speak what exactly is going on there, but forming that relationship repeatedly with water is something that is, for me, deeply healing.
I'll add to that actually, Chelsea. I'm glad you mentioned that. Some of you know that one of my big kind of healing pieces was my skin, due to a lot of chemical exposure through my life and in utero and intergenerationally. And when I was learning with Kathy Kane, one of my mentors in the trauma world, her and another colleague of hers, Stephen Terrell, they saw the old pictures of my skin, because it's much better now, obviously. And I got quite activated when they started lecturing on fluid trauma and chemical trauma, which is from chemicals, but the fluids of the body can also be traumatized through electrocution and electrical current. Being struck by lightning, touching electrical fences. This is very common, I found, with people who have been brought up on farms where cattle fences have electrification to them. Anyways, it turned out that what my system was dealing with was fluid trauma, and working with it is very tricky. And one of the things she said is the best thing for anyone with fluid chemical trauma is to just be in a body of water. Preferably, if you can, but of course not everyone has access to this, an ocean that's warm that you can float in. But if that's not possible, a bath that you can float in, or a pool. I know the chemicals in the pool aren't that great, but just to imagine yourself sinking with the fluid dynamics of the water, and imagining your cells kind of going into coherence. That's the word I'm looking for. So that kind of sine wave is happening, and to use that water as a teacher. But one could also go to a body of water, or listen to water, or watch water, or imagine water, and just that element being very soothing. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a nice sort of way to round out that hydrotherapy concept.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's the way to help the fluid trauma make its way through. Yeah, that's really good to know.
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, one final question for you two. What is and it could be anything, it could be on the topics we've talked about today, but what's sort of your wish and desire right now for humanity? That's a big one.
What do I want for humanity? I think that there's no like zero gain, or what is it? And what is the term? Net zero or zero. You know what I'm trying to say? Like there's no like win or loss.
I maybe just use different language because I know what you mean, but I can't think of it either.
I just think that everyone has the potential and the right to feel good, whether that's, using hydrotherapy, your health, your skin's improving. I just think that everybody has that, I think it's a right, and it's often the more simple, consistent things that are going to help you, or they've helped me, so I can just say from personal experience that it's the personal, or the simple foundational things, like everything we've been talking about here today, that have gotten me the most forward in that line of being. So I think that because hydrotherapy, nutrition, all that stuff is seems so simple, but it's, we're figuring out, like, hydrotherapy, fasting, meditating, or whatever you want to call it, having quiet space is really important. So I think that it's okay to have, it's okay to feel good, and oftentimes it's the basics that can help us get there. Nervous system regulation, socializing with good friends, all that stuff.
Nice.
And I love, I'll just put that in there, because I love going in the lake. We're lucky, we live by the Great Lakes here, so we go in the lakes every day almost. And I love just sitting there and floating. So hearing your talk on the fluid trauma is just like, I fill up my lungs so I can float, and I have to, modulate that a bit. So it's not that relaxing, but just being with water is so important, and being with the earth in its most natural form is one of those foundational things that we all have to keep doing, because I think we innately feel the best there.
Nice.
Here, here. Chelsea, how about yourself?
It's a tricky question, Irene. And I think that I'll go with this idea of yes and. It's something I've been playing with for a while. And it's actually been a really robust part of my understanding of this decolonizing work that I've been doing for about a year. And for me right now, it seems so relevant with current times. For me, yes and is honoring multiple perspectives. And I think that we can both be right and we can both be wrong all simultaneously. And just even the simple gesture of, if I had one hope or one wish for us all, is if you're noticing, like when I say, oh, but, or when I'm hearing someone else's perspective and I interject with a but or an or, I pause for a second and then I rephrase and I say yes and, because it can honor their perspective while simultaneously honoring mine. And I think that, if there was one wish that we could all begin to practice that kind of relating, I think it would be good.
I catch myself doing that too, more so in writing, because but can sometimes be useful in the right context, but also the and. I think I even wrote something last night and I was like, nope, delete, comma, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Right. And it goes back to that, just how we're all so unique. And that's sort of the beauty of the human being, is we're not a herd of cattle. We all have very unique constitutions. I'll use that word again. I love that word.
Yeah.
And histories and learning and I believe in souls and just environments, and that uniqueness there's a lot of there's a lot of exploration there. So I'm just so grateful for you too. I miss seeing you in person. Hopefully that won't be too long before we can meet up and play and maybe go jump in a lake.
Yeah.
Do some hot tubbing somewhere to hot springs.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my gosh,
needed.
yes.
Thank you for your time. I know you're very busy doctors doing your work with your people. For everyone watching, I will put this book reference in the section. There was a few studies that you mentioned, Chelsea, that if you can find them, let me know. And I might just do a little kind of overview of some of these real basic hydrotherapy pieces. And if you have any resources, let me know and we'll link them all below.
Yeah.
And I know that you guys have a physical practice in Ontario, Canada. But for those that want to learn through your resources, what's the best way for people to find you and just check out your stuff?
We have an Instagram and Facebook account. It's the Health Creation Lab. We have a website that we're doing more and more work on. Hint, hint, that we'll do more. It's www.thehealthcreationlab.com.
Which has some free resources.
Which has a
on
blog
it,
that says...
which is building with time.
Yeah.
But our Instagram, I would say, is the best way to...
Yeah, Instagram right now.
I think so.
That's
You send us
usually
an
it.
email.
Yeah, send us an email.
That's always fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if someone is in Ontario, what district or city community do you practice out of?
So we're in Sarnia, which is in southwestern Ontario, which is close to bigger centers like London, Grand Bend, but yeah, Sarnia, it's in the southwest pocket of Ontario. It's about 2.5 hours south of Toronto.
Cool. And can someone work with you virtually in the province of Ontario if they're not in your city?
Yep, if they're a resident of Ontario, we can have them as an active client.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Super. Well, I wish you were in BC because I'd love for you to be my naturopathic doctors, but I feel like I have an in. I've got a back alley with you guys. Thank you so much. Be well.
Thanks for having us.
Always a pleasure.
Yes.
That was fun.
Much love.
It was a lot of fun. Ciao.